6. Tell me something good. I felt that I was warmly received by my mother and my brother Greg. But when I saw my dad, he refused my presence. I could tell by his body language and facial expression that he was angry with me. I was so hurt that he didn't come to greet me with a hug and kind words. But then again, I did anticipate some resistance from him. And it's not my dad's style to be a hugger or kisser anyhow. That's just not how my dad rolls. Although I wished my dad was the kind of dad who I wanted and needed in my mind, I used to give Parker shit over him not reaching out to his own kids and trying to have a relationship with them. He had 5 children. The eldest was 35 and the youngest 7. He had expressed that he loved them all very, very much, but none of them wanted anything to do with him. Now I realize that I was saying this because this is what I wanted from my own dad. I also realized that when I dated Parker, I was essentially dating my dad. I went to my parents' house with a Father's Day card in hand. All I could do was leave him alone and lay the card on the counter where he sits. I had prepared myself mentally and had even gone with a list of things to talk about. I had wanted to have my dad present to cover those things, but it didn't happen. The main thing I had wanted to cover was what had happened to me when I was 3. I had expressed to my mother prior to my visit that I had something that I needed to talk with her about. I sat and talked with my mother and my brother Greg. I had caught them up about my divorce, kids, and life. I spoke of all spiritual things that I had just been through. I left one last thing to talk about, and that was the sexual abuse. I had really wanted to be clear that the repressed memory was not something that had been fabricated by me or planted in my mind by anybody else. I kept telling my mother that it was something that she didn't want to hear, so I had her on the edge of her seat in anticipation. I didn't know what kind of response I would get from her. I couldn't keep her or myself in suspense any longer, so I told her that I had this reoccurring memory for a very long time, and that I never believed in repressed memories. Then I told her about my memory and the emotions I was able to tie to the event. She seemed stunned, but at the same time, it didn't seem to surprise her very much. She felt that she had to tell me again about a family trip to a relative's farm in Switzerland. She was 4 years old, and she had an older sister and brother as well as a younger sister. My grandfather and grandmother had sat them down, and the 4 of them were being questioned about if anybody had touched them inappropriately. They all said they had not been touched. My mother indicated that there was another little girl on this farm and that she may have been touched, because the following morning a farmhand had been fired. I had heard her tell this story before, but now I wondered why she would ever tell me or anybody this story. Was it that she had suspected her father of touching that little girl? Did my mother have lingering questions in her own mind about who her father was? Was it that she knew what had happened to that little girl and she blocked it out of her mind? I continued telling my mother what had happened to me beyond the sexual abuse in my grandfather's office. My grandfather was driving me to meet my mother, brothers, and some other family members at the lake. I was still hysterically crying, most likely red-faced, and with snot and slobber all over my face. At this point, I didn't have much more memory than that to tell her about. I was still at my parents' house, and my dad had begun to warm up to me in a sense. He spoke to me and asked me about what happened to my grandparents' belongings. I felt he implied that I had taken everything for myself, or that I had sold everything and kept the proceeds for myself. I had anticipated this. It was the furthest thing from the truth. I explained that there was only one thing I kept for myself, and it only meant something to me and nobody else. I kept a small 2-inch by 3-inch silver trinket box that had a small rubber key for lifting glass tabletops from furniture. It was my great-grandmother's. She had kept it on the coffee table since I was young. It was like a childhood toy to me. I remember playing with it and the suction sound it would make as I lifted it off the glass. Sometimes I was very successful in annoying my great-grandmother, and she'd tell me to knock it off. The rest of the things that had belonged to my grandparents had been sold or given away. The proceeds were used to remodel the house. Anything else that I couldn't sell was given to charity. I had no use for any of it. The thing is, I didn't just move forward with getting rid of things without first making my entire family aware of what I was doing. And secondly, I had invited every single family member out to the house to take anything that they wanted. Nobody had made a move to come and get anything that they wanted. I couldn't wait for them forever. I had to move forward. I felt I was the only responsible one out of the bunch. Maybe more accurately, I was the one who stepped up and did the work. I needed that chapter of taking care of my grandparents and anything attached to them over with. My dad's questions upset me. I knew my family didn't really know me or who I was. I began crying and went to collect my things. I was ready to leave. I promised myself that I wouldn't allow my family to make me feel badly about what I had done. I wasn't going to allow them to think that I had ill intentions or that I was being deceitful and greedy. They always seemed to be able to make me question myself and make me feel bad when I had absolutely no reason to. This was almost like my dealings with my ex-husband's family. I always had my heart and intentions in the right place, but everything I did or said would be twisted in a negative way. My own family didn't trust me or believe what I had to say. My dad saw me upset and realized I was going to leave. He started talking to me differently and walked toward the front door, so I wouldn't leave. My mother and brother Greg had been outside while I talked to my dad. They were coming in as my dad and I were in the kitchen talking. Not sure how the subject came up, possibly my mother, but it was brought up what I had told her earlier about being sexually abused by my grandfather in Canada. I continued to tell the story to my dad. I wanted him to know that I had the flash of memories and that I couldn't remember the actual act because I had blocked it out. I had no idea what to expect when you tell your parents that you had repressed memories of being sexually abused when you were 3. I was 47 years old, and this was all new information. Not only to them, but strangely enough, it was news to me. I do think my dad was concerned about me, but what stuck in my mind after telling him was that he said he knew something was off about my grandfather. He wanted my mom to call her childhood friend Susie. I thought it was an odd reaction. My dad wasn't on that trip to Canada with us. He must have picked up some odd behavior from my grandfather at some point and had shared his impressions with my mother at some earlier point in time. Mind you, my dad had only been around my mother's parents on less than 5 occasions. It was time for me to go home after this long, emotional day.